A recent study by the University of North Carolina showed that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the nutritional guidelines that may have taken us down that unhealthy path and give you some action steps to put into place to make sure you remain metabolically healthy. In this week's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about the current state of our metabolic health in the US and how we got there. And it, in my opinion, is probably the most pressing health concern we have right now. And you might ask, well, really, does that seem like, having a few extra pounds overweight, is that really the most pressing health concern, considering what 2020 has been like? But when you consider true metabolic health really affects us, not just how we look in our jeans, right? Not how we look in a bathing suit, but how it affects us chemically, biochemically. It makes our immune system more compromised, makes us more susceptible to other diseases or progresses towards other diseases like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Okay. And makes us more vulnerable to viruses and other illness in general. It compromises our immune system, it creates inflammation, and it impairs our body's ability to fight off other invaders and generally keep us healthy, keep us from aging quickly. And there was a recent study. I think it shocked a lot of people from University of North Carolina. It was actually 2018. I consider that recent. But only 12% of the U.S. adults are considered metabolically healthy. And this was based on 5 risk factors. It's not just like random opinions, okay? But it was based on 5 risk factors where they were at optimal levels to be metabolically healthy, and they had to be at optimal levels without help from medication. And those risk factors were hypertension or blood pressure. Basically, have optimal levels of blood pressure, waist circumference. Okay, excuse me. Let me start over here. 5 factors: blood pressure, waist circumference, blood glucose, so your blood sugar levels, your triglyceride levels, and the levels of HDL cholesterol. So thankfully, yes, HDL, not LDL. So they definitely got that right, because that is certainly the more important level to look at, especially a HDL triglyceride ratio there. And as long as those were in optimal levels, without medication, without help from meds, you were considered metabolically healthy. Only 12% of the people surveyed hit that mark. And they looked at just over 8,000 people. So I thought it was a good sampling of a variety of people from different genders, ethnic background, and age, but all in an adult range. So 1 in 8 adults is metabolically healthy, according to this survey. And again, those risk factors are pretty standard when you're looking at, say, risk factors for heart disease. Those are what you'd look at. So metabolic health being certainly a precursor. So poor metabolic health, a precursor. All of these would be precursors for insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease if you were out of range or needed help with from medications to stabilize any of these metrics. Now, I recently had a couple RDs, registered dietitians, on the last couple of weeks, Michelle Hearn and Diana Rogers. And in talking to Michelle, now these guys are, yes, they're trained through the system, but they understand how poorly we've created our nutrition guidelines, how poorly our nutrition guidelines are serving us, and how misguided they are, how they're just really one of the influences over the what's now called the Academy of Nutrition, which was formerly the American Dietetics Association. They are sponsored by, Michelle Hearn pointed this out in the podcast, sponsored by Pepsi, General Mills, and ConAgra. Okay, so big processed food corporations. And this is the food, through contracts. These same companies have contracts with the USDA to provide food for our schools, our military, our hospitals, our elderly care facilities, and even our prisons. And let's face it, if they're the ones supplying the money, sponsoring the American Nutrition Academy of Nutrition, as it's called now, who helps make up our nutrition guidelines. And they have the contracts with the USDA to supply the food for schools, hospitals, as I said, military. Do you think there's some influence from those processed food corporations on the guidelines? Is it possible that there's some influence there from big food, and in making up things like the food pyramid or the plate, and these recommendations that come out from the USDA every 5 years or so? Is it possible that's compromised? And does that sound like a conspiracy theory? That's not a conspiracy theory. It's money. It's just money. It's just corporation having influence, buying influence. Happens all the time. It's politics, right? That's what we have lobbyists for. That's what lobbyists are for, right? To get influence. Now, going back as far as 1967, the Sugar Research Foundation actually paid a couple of Harvard nutritionists. You may have heard about this story because it was published in New York Times. It was put in some of the one of the medical journals, but it was a story that came out several years ago. Sugar Research Foundation paid a couple of Harvard nutritionists to write review papers that were then published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And these review papers were set out to blame saturated fat and cholesterol for heart disease and discredit the studies. There were studies then showing that sugar was actually the culprit for heart disease and diabetes and so forth, but mainly heart disease. And they paid not a lot. They didn't pay them a lot, but they paid them enough to get their influence, to the point that even these Harvard nutritionists, right, PhDs, guys in charge of nutrition school, basically, public health, actually submitted the papers back to the Research Foundation to make sure they were up to their liking before submitting them to be published in New England Journal of Medicine. Now, how's that for buying influence? It's pretty shocking, I would think. And one of these Harvard nutritionists actually went on to help draft the nutrition guidelines in 1977 when they met with all the politicians there, right? And came up with a food pyramid. That was 1977. Finally, struck. Came up 1977. Published more so. 1980 was more solidified, but it really was published by a bunch of politicians and a couple nutritionists. And there were plenty of people who said, "Hey, let's hold off. The science isn't clear on this," even in 1977. But they were in a hurry. McGovern, who was overseeing, George McGovern, overseeing this political committee to create these guidelines, was in a hurry to create something. He wanted to put something out. He didn't know anything between nutrition, but he wanted to put something out. He wanted to create an answer. Plenty of nutritionists said, "Hey, we're not ready. This is not settled. We don't really know the answers. There's arguments on both sides." And there were arguments on both sides for sugar versus fat cholesterol. But one of these Harvard nutritionists that was paid off actually sat on that council, was helped with part of drawing up the food guidelines. So where do you think his loyalties lie? And then, of course, he sat on the nutrition unit of the USDA. So, I mean, a person of influence, you're in Harvard, you got a lot of influence, you're moving on. And he continued to have influence over our nutrition guidelines. So it's paid off by the Sugar Research Foundation. So, November, we're in December now. November was called Diabetes Awareness Month. Now, personally, I didn't see a lot of diabetes awareness. I saw one or two influencers I know who post something about it, but I mean, honestly, I saw more about National Donut Day than I saw about diabetes the whole month of November. National Donut Day gets everybody's posting about that. There's lots of attention. Go get a free donut. Here. Diabetes Awareness Month, I didn't see get a lot of press. Now, there's a lot going on in November in our country right now in 2020. There's a lot of politics. There's a virus that's on the loose and causing a lot of havoc. But a whole month of Diabetes Awareness Month, I personally just didn't see a lot. But let's just look at it right now. Let's just have our own little diabetes awareness minute. or a few minutes here. There are medically supervised programs that help people reverse diabetes, often getting them off their meds in as little as 6 weeks. And we've had some people on. I've had some people on the podcast who work in these programs. Megan Ramos with the fasting method works with Dr. Jason Fung with primarily a fasting and low carb diet, but he was fasting to help people reverse their type 2 diabetes. Dr. Kristin Baier, who was just on a month ago at a Low Carb San Diego, also helped people with weight loss, reversing diabetes, again, off meds, sometimes 6-8 weeks through low carb, some fasting, making it work for the person's lifestyle. But basically that's it. You're cutting back carbohydrates, you're reining that in, you're controlling food frequency, meal frequency, how often someone's eating. And instead of perpetuating the disease by giving them insulin to match a diet that they like based on the food pyramid, they're changing their diet and lifestyle to really just reverse the disease, get them off the meds altogether. There's a real popular TED Talk by Dr. Sarah Hallberg, who's the medical director of a medically supervised weight loss program, the most successful, really considered the most successful weight loss program in the U.S. at the University of Indiana, Health Arnett. In her TED Talk, basically she says that, ignore the guidelines. So those nutrition guidelines, the food pyramid, the plate, whatever it looks like now, ignore the guidelines because they're not right. They're not going to help you lose weight or reverse diabetes. Thankful for these people who are in the medical field, who are stepping out and creating these programs and are ignoring the guidelines with criticism from their peers, definitely. But they're doing it because that's what they care about, helping people. And they know better. Just like Diana and Michelle are restoration, they know better. They've learned from personal experience and in working with people clinically, helping people, and couldn't continue. Well, Diana never did. She knew what was right before she became a registered dietitian. Michelle learned from personal experience as well. Diana, a co-author of Sacred Cow with bestselling author Rob Wolf of Paleo Solution. And she also produced and directed a documentary, Sacred Cow, which had a sneak peek of last week. Should be coming out first year, larger scale, more if you can see it. And then Michelle Hearn is a ultra runner. She's the number one female for 2020, number female for a 6-hour event for 2020 named that by Ultra Runners magazine. So she's an ultra runner. She did a 6-hour event. She's a number one time for a 6-hour event in 2020. So, serious athlete, serious endurance athlete, low carb athlete. I think she said she eats a lot of animal products, a lot of animal protein, not products, but animal protein, whole food, and a little bit of carb to, recover from her runs, like 50, 60, maybe 80 grams, not much. What a lot of people might shoot for if they're trying to lose weight. She's doing that running 80 miles a week. So in her training. And they each have their own way of eating in a sense. I mean, they eat for their diet, for what works for them. But they know not everyone they consult with is going to eat exactly like them, but they try to move them in a direction to be healthier, in a direction that is eating that is one contrary to the food pyramid, but one that's going to move them in a direction of health depending on their needs. And they both recommend prioritizing animal protein. Approximately, give or take, with some room, little difference between the two of them, but not much. 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, or per pound of ideal body weight. So if you're 250 and you want to get down to 200 and you're shooting for 200 and that's excess fat, 50 pounds of fat you want to lose, and you want to, 200 pounds of ideal body weight, then 200 grams of protein from animal protein would be good, would be ideal. If you eat more than that, that's fine, because 1 gram per pound is also good. I know Michelle eats quite a bit more than that for her body weight as a runner to recover, and that's most of her diet. Diana mentioned actually start with a lot of people, because a lot of women, you tell men to go eat some more meat, they're like all over it, right? They love it. Feels great. A lot of women are a little, a little more, I say, pensive or apprehensive about eating more meat. They might have a concept that sounds kind of manly or heavy, or it doesn't sound something that might make them bulky, which is not really not the case at all. But she recommends getting started, with women who are not used to eat that much meat. Just start with eating 1 pound of meat per day. If you're not used to it, that's give or take about, depending on what you're eating, it's going to be about 100 grams of protein. It's a good place to start. Chances are you weigh more than 100 pounds. So that's not quite 1 gram per pound of body weight, but it'll get you moving in the right direction. Get used to eating a decent amount, a minimal amount of meat. Start with a pound a day. So 2 8-ounce servings for eating a couple meals. And that's really very contrary to the food pyramid, which is recommending 6 to 11 servings of grains a day, which they do not recommend, but they're prioritize your animal protein, then eat whole foods. Other foods you have, some vegetables, even some fruit, but go with whole foods. Stay away from processed foods. But if you start with that much protein, you're going to be satisfied. You're going to get a lot of nutrients, micronutrients that you need, a healthy amount of fats that you need, and your blood sugar is going to be stable. You're going to be very satisfied with what you've eaten. You're going to have a lot of cravings for other things. You're not going to have this as much of a blood sugar roller coaster if you're eating a pound or 2 of meat per day. And now she, in her documentary Sacred Cow, Walter Willett, if you don't know who he is, he's a chair over the nutrition public health department at Harvard, and nutrition professor, got a lot of letters after his name, several degrees, but he's definitely a big proponent of food pyramid, reducing meat intake, and just 60-70% of your diet coming from carbohydrates, lots of grains, right? Lots of grains in your, plenty of the wheat, the soy, right? That's all good, but don't have too much meat. But yet she got him. She was talking to him. She, this documentary is very much focused on regenerative farming, the health of meat, but also how meat works in the system, right? How it can work, how farming can work to be a better way of farming, regenerative farming. It's better for the animal, better for us nutritionally, better for the environment. Generally, the quick summary. And she got Walter Willett. She was interviewing Walter Willett on feeding animals, grains in confined areas, food lot cows. And he said, yeah, he come to admit, if you give animals grain and keep them confined, they're gonna get fat, right? That's how they fatten them up a little bit. They give them grain, they keep them confined, they fatten up. And he said, it's fair to assume that the same is true for humans. Okay. She was very excited about getting him to admit that on camera, and I don't blame her, because that's what he's been recommending. We don't all go work out on, right? We don't go work out farms. Most of us don't do physical labor, yet we're supposed to get 6 to 11 servings of grains in our diet, 55, 60, 70% of our calories from carbohydrates. What's supposed to happen? We're eating a lot of grains. We're in a confined, again, we're sitting behind desks. We're, COVID 2020, most of us are confined to our homes or our offices. Very limited movement right now, right? Gyms are closed. Everything's closed. So what do you think is going to happen? Even without that, we don't move a lot. And yet we're supposed to be eating several, like half a dozen to a dozen servings of grains per day. We're going to fatten up. So choose who do we want to listen to for our nutritional advice? Do we want to, or we have to ask, are the people advising us on how to, get healthy with your diet and lifestyle choices, are they going to profit from you being sick? Is that who you're listening to? Are the people that are giving you your advice profiting from your sickness, from your struggle, from your lack of metabolic health? And I mean, if we're talking about the food industry, big food, processed food industry, having influence on nutritional guidelines and on the studies that are done about food, right? The food frequency questionnaires, they're not real studies, they're observational studies, generally speaking, that are showing how terrible meat is, whatever, and recommending 6 to 11 servings of grains. Do they profit from that? Who profits from that? Probably those same corporations profit from you eating more of those foods. You got to fill, where are you going to get those from? Are you baking bread at home? Tell me. Baking a lot of bread from scratch, fermenting it, and sprouting it, fermenting it like they did 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, for fermenting, sprouting, fermenting, making your own homemade sourdough that's healthy for you from an older wheat? No, no, of course not. We're buying it already done in a box, in a bag, some sort of packaging. We're getting these carbohydrates from, usually not all from veggies either, right? There'll be a lot of veggies to get 60 or 70% of your calories from vegetables. The cost of diabetes in this country is about $327 billion a year in the US, right? And it goes up about, give or take, 25% every 5 years. So 5 years ago, it's 25% less. It's fair to assume that number was from 2017. So it's fair to assume in 2022, that number is going to be about 25% bigger. 327 billion a year. That's a cost of everything from meds, missed work, the complications, hospital visits, doctor visits. Unfortunately, the cost of insulin has just dropped dramatically due to some executive orders this year by the Trump administration that allowed the Health and Human Services Department, the HSS, to negotiate lower drug prices for Americans. And insulin was one of those that had a huge decrease. Typically costs someone about $10,000 a year for insulin for a type 2 diabetic. And with that, type 2 diabetes is 95% of the diabetes in this country. So when I talk about reversing diabetes, we're talking about type 2. Type 1 is about 5% of those who are diabetic, 5%. So it's 327 billion. That cost is 95% type 2 diabetics, for sure. But the cost has come down for all. Everyone who needs the insulin, the cost has dropped dramatically. And that's a huge benefit, huge relief. However, there's still the hospital visits, the doctor's visits, the missed work, all the complications that arise from diabetes, which lead to heart disease or blindness, neuropathy. So the system is set up to keep giving people insulin, not change their diet or give them a diet that really feeds that, because that's really what's happened since the food pyramid. We've had an increase of metabolic disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, all those markers that we talked about at the beginning. Those have all gone the wrong direction since 1980, since we had our new food pyramid telling us how we're supposed to eat to avoid things like eggs and meat and that kind of thing. I recently had probably early fall, Jason Carter. He's the Keto Apocalypse on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, he's an RN. He's an RN in New York. He worked on the COVID wards. Had him as a guest, again, about probably September. And then I have another friend here locally as an RN named Charles. And I've talked to them about the system because they've had to bring food to diabetics in the hospital. What does that look like? What does that diabetic tray look like? It's full of sugar. I mean, yeah, they get the sugar-free syrup with their pancakes and their juice. The impact of that sugar-free syrup, considering they get juice and pancakes and not much meat. Good luck getting some kind of decent amount of meat. The lunches are, bread, starchy stuff. It's not what you would think to give someone who has a problem with managing blood sugar and who has an insulin issue, who's on insulin. And they struggle with that. They struggle with giving them that and not being able to. I mean, they tried to tell people, but they, typically scolded, warned about not telling people their own personal experience, or what they know better about how they should be eating, about eating lower carb. And really, it's of their opinion that the system is set up, the healthcare system is feeding off of sick people, essentially, not the people working in it. The people working in it are there to serve. They're servant hearts, nurses, hearts of servants, of course, doctors, most part, they're there to help people. They're there to help people. So not the people working in it, but the system. The doctors and nurses don't control the system. They're just part of the system. That's their job. Their job is to be part of that system and do what they can within that system. The system, so, is set up to keep sick people coming through and sick, billing the insurance company or billing Medicare, keep the pharmaceuticals, and the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmaceutical industry and the big food industry has a lot of influence, USDA, right, through the USDA, a lot of influence on our healthcare system and what is recommended, what is given to treat these people. That's where there's a lot of influence on that system. And again, in their opinion, having worked in it as nurses, it's set up to basically milk those patients, to milk the system, use this patients to have a reason to bill for medical expenses and keep them coming back, keep them coming back, keep them coming back. It's not set up to make them better so they reverse their problem and don't come back and no longer need meds at all. So, there's never a mention of reversing type 2 diabetes. In hospital, a lot of doctors will tell you, because it's what they've been taught, that it's not possible. It's not possible. That's what they believe is not possible. Even when Jason Fung started doing that 10 years ago, he had irate doctors calling patients, the other doctors, saying, "Why are you telling my patient they can reverse their diabetes? Why are you telling them these things?" Because it's true. Because that's what he wanted to do. That was his passion, to actually help people. Still is. Still doing it. So all 5 of those risk factors, the waist circumference, triglycerides, blood pressure, blood glucose, and HDL cholesterol, are affected by diet, right? They're affected by diet. Particularly high blood sugar, which leads to higher insulin levels, which sets off all of those things. You have high insulin levels, you're probably going to have high blood pressure. If you're insulin resistant, you're going to have higher triglycerides and a lower HDL, which is not good. You want a higher HDL and lower triglycerides, right? And blood glucose is going to be, your blood sugar is going to be high because you can't manage it. You got insulin going all the time. Insulin resistant, you're going to have high blood sugar all the time. And maybe if you're diabetic, you're taking more insulin to keep it low because your body can't manage it anymore. And your waist circumference is definitely going to be getting bigger because you're going to be gaining visceral fat. Visceral fat being under the muscle, around the organs. Your visceral area opening in your torso is going to be gaining fat, and that fat again goes around the organs and affects the function of those organs, which is why it affects pancreatic function, liver function. You have fatty liver, you're going to have all sorts of problems. Pancreatic, you're going to have problems with insulin and regulating blood sugar. Heart disease, right? Kidneys, more high blood pressure and kidney disease. These are driven by hormonal reactions from those organs and the reactions to the food that we eat. It's not about calories. Weight loss isn't about calories, it's about hormones. It's a hormonal reaction. Primary hormones being insulin, glucagon, and their balance of controlling blood sugar. And then you have ghrelin and leptin affecting satiety and hunger. Okay. And several others that play roles in that, but that's where food has a direct influence on those 4, what we eat. And, of course, calories can play a role in weight loss or in losing fat and regaining metabolic health, but they're not the primary focus. They should not be the first priority. They come in after you get some other things in alignment, after you get your other metabolic hormones and your diet and your lifestyle, your habits in place to let those metabolic hormones come back into alignment, come back into where they need to be, to allow you to burn fat, to allow you to regulate your blood sugar normally and diminish the cravings so you don't have unneeded hunger signals from blood sugar going up and down. And that once you allow the body to access body fat, lower the blood sugar, lower insulin levels, then you can actually have more time between meals. You're not hungry all the time. You can make better decisions about what you eat. And your hunger actually goes down naturally. It goes down without thinking about it, because you can supplement those missing calories with body fat. You start supplementing with body fat because you have a schedule where you're not going to eat, right? Or you're not eating between meals, and your meals are less glycemic, have less effect on your blood sugar. You can actually access fat for energy. That's how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to be eating every time we need energy. Excuse me. We eat to supplement nutrients, right? It's information. There is energy there, but the energy throughout our day should be coming from, right, liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, stored fat. That should be a nice level, steady supply when those metabolic hormones are in alignment. So then you'll eat less, and the caloric decrease will come as a byproduct of your lifestyle. And that's why I created the Metabolic Makeover program that you heard about in the pre-roll. That's what it does. It takes people through stages to change their eating habits to 3 meals a day. Then it includes some intermittent fasting and changing what they're eating with whole foods, prioritizing protein, a lot more veggies, if they tolerate it. Okay. But if you're going to have a carb, it's probably going to be more of a veggie or a whole food carbohydrate, not a processed food, not a sugar, processed grain, alcohol, right? Seed oils, eliminate those things. And that's basically habits. Let's hit the habits. What are your action steps to change your habits and get realigned metabolic hormones to work like they're supposed to, so you can access body fat, like for energy, rather than thinking you've got to have a snack every time. Whatever happens, you feel a little lightheaded. Okay, those things don't happen anymore. Or you feel like you've got to go for a walk, or you're going to go work out, and you got to have a saying, okay, you've got enough stored fuel here to get you through. Most of you, right? Most of us. So we start with, as I mentioned before, eat whole food, prioritize animal protein, and take my Diana and Michelle's advice for the protein goal: 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, or your current body weight, if that's at a good spot for you. And that is animal protein, because we just don't absorb plant protein the same way or as well. It doesn't have all the aminos that we need. And there's a lot of micronutrients in that animal meat, let's face it. But so prioritize animal protein and everything in general, whole food, 1 ingredient food as much as possible. Eat, ideally, no more than 2 or 3 meals a day. And if you can cut it down to 1, that's great. If you're not hungry, don't eat. Once you get to that point where fat is supplementing your calories, you feel like, I really don't need to eat. I'm not that hungry. Don't eat because you think you're supposed to, because someone told you to eat 5 or 6 times a day. It's ridiculous. That's, again, elevating the blood sugar. If you can skip breakfast one morning, just have some coffee with no sugar in it, a little cream maybe, great. Just have lunch and dinner. That's plenty of food. Prioritize your protein. Have whole food around that as you desire or as needed for your activity. But that's it. That's all you need. If the idea of intermittent fasting sounds scary, like the word fast, that F word kind of startles you, just think of it this way. You're just skipping breakfast. You're having coffee. You have lunch, normal time, dinner, normal time. Don't call it something that scares you. Just, you're skipping breakfast. You're busy. Keep yourself busy. Have a cup of coffee. Get on with your day. Avoid processed food, which includes things with sugar, processed grains, and the cooking oils like soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, safflower, sunflower. You say, I don't really cook with those. Okay. You may not cook with those, but they're in the processed food. If you read the ingredients, hydrogenated oils or any really kind of oils as filler. They put those in there to help preserve them and give them a little bit of weight because they're processed food. And those are processed foods and they're cheap. So read the labels. And you're going to see all of these ingredients on there. And I guarantee you, processed grains, so some sort of wheat, corn, soy, sugar of some form. Okay, I may not say sugar, but it's going to have some sort of fancy name for it, especially if it's like some kind of pretty organic looking processed food, right? And then those oils in there. Limit alcohol as much as possible. Alcohol will get in the way of weight loss. It will get in the way of, if you're trying to reduce fatty liver and reduce visceral fat, alcohol definitely adds to visceral fat. Limit alcohol. In my opinion, 2 drinks a week, tops. So it's 1 drink 2 nights or 2 drinks on 1 night, but that should be your limit. If you can eliminate it altogether, even better, you'll drop weight even faster, but it will get in the way of your weight loss, if not add to stored fat. So processed food and alcohol, definitely your enemy. And the one that's not dietary, but it's definitely lifestyle and will affect your hormones is sleep, trying to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. So you're going, oh, that sounds interesting. Why is that so important? Well, that can greatly affect those metabolic hormones we mentioned. It can affect insulin levels. It can affect your hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin, and it affects your stress hormone, cortisol, which can also drive sugar into your bloodstream. So it will change. It can affect your desire for food, your cravings, and if blocking fat burning by elevating insulin, then you're definitely not going to be able to burn fat. You're going to be hungrier. You're going to be a little cranky because you're tired and lethargic. You're going to eat to try to get more energy. It's just a bad combination. It's one of my toughest things to do, try to get 7 solid hours of sleep. It does escape me often, but it is important for stabilizing those hormones. And let's remember, this is a battle of hormones, not calories. Get the hormones in line. The calorie alignment will follow because your quality of your food and sleep will affect those hormones first. If you get some activity, great. But make your diet and then your sleep priorities. Number 1, with those basic steps. Put these simple habits in place, and your metabolic health will improve. And then you can use those, use your own markers of progress. You want to step on the scale, find scale's kind of a lagging indicator. It's fine on a daily basis. If you can get your body fat tested somewhere that's convenient, some gyms and some doctor's offices, they have those where you're hooked, hold on with your hands and your feet, and it's a good, accurate measurement. Great. But you can use those 5 metabolic health markers I mentioned at the beginning. Your waist circumference, so your waist should start shrinking, your clothes should start feeling better, fitting better. Your blood pressure should come down. Your blood sugar should come down. Your triglycerides should come down. And your HDL should hopefully go up. It won't go up a lot, but it will go up, maybe 10, 20 points. That'd be fantastic. You can have those measured on a blood test. Blood glucose, triglycerides, and HDL easily measured on, get a blood test every, 3 or 6 months. You can go to anywhere and have that done, right? Usually there's labs around. If your doctor isn't, if that's not convenient to do at your doctor's office, then go have it done in a lab. Just pay to have that. But it's a good marker for you to know. Start here. This is where you're starting. Get a waist measurement, blood pressure, which you can check those weekly very easily. And check your blood glucose, blood sugar. You can actually get a meter at the drugstore and check your blood sugar, your fasted blood sugar in the morning, whenever you want it to. You don't need a prescription for that. You could do that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis just to see if it's trending down. And then your triglycerides and HDL, have it checked every 6 months or so, just to make sure you're moving in the right direction with these health habits. But you're going to notice as your waist starts to shrink, you'll feel better. Your energy's better. You're not feeling the cravings. You're not having to eat as often, and your energy level is more stable. Then it's working. Those are the immediate benefits. Your energy level stabilizes. Your cravings really aren't there anymore like they were. You're probably going to sleep better, and your clothes start fitting better. You start dropping that visceral fat. You start burning off that visceral fat. There's your biomarkers to know that you're moving in the right direction. Change your habits, your body will follow.